Saturday, 09:14 a.m. Atlantic Standard Time. HMCS Harry DeWolf, a Canadian Arctic patrol vessel, detects an unidentified ship transiting the Northwest Passage without authorization. Location: Lancaster Sound, approximately 180 kilometers north of Resolute Bay. The vessel is large, civilian configuration, research equipment visible on deck, but the transponder identifies it as Zhuilong 3, a Chinese polar research vessel. The problem is simple. Canada claims the Northwest Passage as internal waters requiring permission for transit. China claims these are international straits open to all vessels under freedom of navigation principles. This dispute has simmered for decades as Arctic ice retreats and new shipping routes open. Today, the dispute becomes crisis because the Chinese vessel is not asking permission and the Canadian vessel is not granting passage. Commander of HMCS Harry DeWolf, Captain Sarah Mitchell, reviews the standing orders. Assert Canadian sovereignty. Intercept unauthorized vessels. Demand compliance with Canadian Arctic Waters Pollution Prevention Act. Escort non-compliant vessels out of Canadian territory. Use minimum necessary force. But what constitutes minimum necessary force against a ship from a nuclear power that refuses to acknowledge your authority? 09:31 a.m. The Canadian vessel closes to within 2 kilometers. Radio contact is established. Chinese vessel Zhuilong 3, you are transiting Canadian internal waters without authorization. You are directed to stop engines and prepare for boarding by Canadian authorities. The response comes in clear English with slight accent. Canadian vessel Zhuilong 3 is conducting legitimate scientific research in international waters. We do not recognize Canadian sovereignty over these straits. We are exercising freedom of navigation under international law. We will continue our transit. This is the script both sides have rehearsed. This is the confrontation that was inevitable as soon as the ice melted enough to make the passage navigable year-round. The question is what happens when neither side backs down. What should command do first? A. Board the vessel by force. B. Escort without boarding. C. Request international arbitration. Captain Mitchell reports the situation to Canadian Joint Operations Command in Ottawa. The chain of command activates rapidly. Minister of National Defense is briefed. Prime Minister is notified. The United States Northern Command is informed because American interests in Arctic sovereignty are directly connected to Canadian claims. If Canada's position weakens, American security in the Arctic weakens. At 10:03 a.m., additional information changes the calculation. Underwater sensors detect the acoustic signature of a submarine in the area. Classification: Chinese Type 093 Nuclear Attack Submarine. The research vessel is not alone. The submarine provides protection and sends a message. China is prepared to defend its claimed rights with military assets. 40 kilometers to the east, Russian Northern Fleet vessels are conducting exercises. 3 surface ships, at least 1 submarine. They are monitoring the situation. Russia has its own Arctic claims and its own interest in preventing Canada from establishing precedent that internal waters can be declared unilaterally over international straits. Moscow and Beijing are not coordinating officially, but their interests align perfectly. Undermine Canadian sovereignty, establish freedom of navigation, open the Arctic to their vessels without Western gatekeeping. The Global Conflict Room analysis shows the larger pattern. This is not about one ship in one strait. This is about who controls the future of Arctic navigation, who profits from shortened shipping routes between Asia and Europe, who accesses undersea resources, who dominates the last frontier on Earth. Inside the Prime Minister's office in Ottawa, the emergency meeting is tense. The options are limited and dangerous. Option 1. Board Zhuilong 3 by force. Canadian Special Operations capable personnel can be inserted by helicopter. Take control of the vessel. Arrest the crew. Tow the ship to Canadian port. assert sovereignty through action. But this means armed Canadians seizing Chinese nationals and Chinese property. The submarine might surface. The confrontation might escalate. China might retaliate against Canadian interests elsewhere. Option 2. Escort the vessel through the passage without boarding. Shadow it continuously. Document the violation. File diplomatic protests. Pursue the matter through international courts. This avoids immediate confrontation, but effectively concedes that Canada cannot enforce its claims. Every future vessel will cite this precedent. The passage becomes international by default. Option 3. Blockade the passage ahead of the Chinese vessel. Position Canadian ships to physically prevent forward movement. Force China to either turn back or initiate contact. Make them choose between retreat and aggression. This is brinkmanship. This is betting that China will not start a shooting war over one research vessel. But it is also betting that Canada can maintain the blockade if China decides to test it. What happens next determines the next decade. The Arctic is warming faster than anywhere on Earth. Ice coverage that once made the Northwest Passage impassable for most of the year is now melting. Shipping companies are planning routes. Energy companies are surveying resources. Military forces are positioning for advantage. The nation that controls access controls the future. At 11:47 a.m., the decision is made. Canadian Special Operations Forces will board Sui Long 3, establish Canadian authority, arrest the captain for violating Canadian law, escort the vessel to Resolute Bay, process the crew, and eventually return them to China. But assert the principle that this is Canadian water requiring Canadian permission. The operation is planned for 1 p.m., 3 hours to position assets, brief the boarding team, coordinate with air support, monitor the Chinese submarine, watch for Russian interference. The window is tight because darkness comes early this far north. Even in summer and night, operations increase risk. At 12:15 p.m., American officials contact Ottawa. The conversation is direct. We support your sovereignty claims. We will provide intelligence support, but we cannot provide military backup without congressional authorization, and that takes time. If this goes wrong, Canada is initially on its own. The message is clear. Political support is guaranteed. Military support is conditional. This is the reality of Arctic security, where vast distances and extreme conditions mean that help is always hours or days away, even when allies are willing. At 12:33 p.m., Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs issues a statement. Canada's harassment of Chinese scientific vessel is illegal and provocative. China will take all necessary measures to protect its citizens and its rights. We urge Canada to cease its violations of international law immediately. The statement is broadcast globally. The narrative is being established. China is the victim. Canada is the aggressor. International opinion is being shaped before the boarding even occurs. At 12:44 p.m., the Chinese submarine surfaces, not fully. Just enough to extend communications mast and deploy a towed array sonar. This is a signal. We are here. We are watching. We are ready. The Canadian frigate HMCS Ville de Quebec, which was transiting 200 kilometers south, receives emergency tasking. Proceed maximum speed to Lancaster Sound. Provide anti-submarine capability. Arrive time, 4 hours. Too late for the boarding operation, but in time for whatever comes after. Necessary deterrence or dangerous escalation. The question echoes through command centers from Ottawa to Washington to Brussels, because NATO is watching and allies are calculating, and everyone is asking whether Canada is defending sovereignty or starting a conflict that could spread. At 1 p.m., the operation begins. CH-148 Cyclone helicopter launches from HMCS Harry de Wolf. Boarding team, 8 Canadian Special Operations Forces personnel, armed but with orders to use minimum force. The helicopter approaches Sui Long 3 from the stern. The Chinese vessel does not slow. does not change course, does not acknowledge the approaching aircraft. At 1:04 p.m., the boarding team fast ropes onto the deck of Sui Long 3. Canadian boots are on Chinese deck in waters both claim. The crew does not resist, but does not cooperate. They stand passively, filming everything with phones, creating documentation for their own narrative. The Chinese captain is informed in English and Mandarin that he is under arrest for violating Canadian Arctic waters regulations. He responds calmly, "I do not recognize Canadian authority in international waters. I am operating legally under international law. Any detention is illegal." The Canadian team leader does not debate. The boarding team secures the bridge, takes control of the vessel, orders it to stop engines and prepare for towing. At 1:17 p.m., the Chinese submarine fully surfaces 400 meters from Sui Long 3. Hatches open. Personnel emerge on deck. They are filming. They are observing. They are not taking offensive action, but their presence is a threat. One submarine can sink a patrol vessel in minutes if it chooses to engage. The Canadian commander faces a decision: continue the operation despite the submarine, or suspend and de-escalate. The orders are clear, but the situation has changed. Which system activates first in a missile alert? A. Radar. B. Satellites. C. Command link. The answer is irrelevant in submarine warfare, where the first indication of attack is often the torpedo already in the water, and the warning time is measured in seconds, and the defensive options are extremely limited, especially for surface vessels without significant anti-submarine capabilities. At 1:19 p.m., contact is made with Ottawa. The situation is reported. Chinese submarine has surfaced. No hostile action, but clear implied threat. Request guidance. The response takes 4 minutes. 4 minutes where everyone on both vessels understands that the wrong move means casualties. The guidance arrives at 1:23 p.m. Continue the operation. Do not be intimidated, but do not provoke. The submarine is monitoring, not attacking. Proceed with the arrest and escort. At 1:31 p.m., Sui Long 3 is under tow. HMCS Harry de Wolf has the Chinese vessel secured and is beginning the slow transit to Resolute Bay. Speed, 6 knots. Distance, 180 kilometers. Transit time, approximately 30 hours. 30 hours where anything can happen. The Chinese submarine follows at a distance, maintaining visual contact. The Russian vessels to the east change course, moving closer. By 3:04 p.m., the international reaction is intensifying. United States issues statements supporting Canada's sovereignty and right to enforce its laws in its territory. United Kingdom backs the Canadian position. European Union calls for dialogue and peaceful resolution. China demands immediate release of vessel and crew. Russia states that freedom of navigation must be respected. India, Japan, and South Korea watch carefully because the precedent affects their own maritime disputes. If you follow global conflict analysis, type GCR. The Arctic is becoming the new South China Sea. Multiple claims, insufficient law, abundant resources, rising tensions. By 7 p.m., 10 hours after the initial contact, Sui Long 3 is still under Canadian escort, but the diplomatic battle is intensifying. China has filed complaint with International Court of Justice. China has threatened economic retaliation against Canadian exports. Chinese state media is broadcasting footage of Canadian pirates boarding peaceful research vessel. The narrative war is as intense as the maritime confrontation. At 11:34 p.m., new complication emerges. Weather deteriorating. Arctic storm moving into the area. Wind increasing. Seas building. Towing operations in storm conditions are dangerous. The Canadian commander must decide. Continue the tow in worsening weather. Seek shelter and delay. Or release the Chinese vessel and lose the enforcement action. The decision is made to continue. Slow the speed. Monitor conditions. but maintain the tow. The sovereignty claim requires following through. Over the next 18 hours, the transit continues through deteriorating weather. Waves reach 4 meters. Ice chunks in the water create additional hazards, but the tow holds. At 5:47 p.m. Sunday, 32 hours after the initial contact, Zhuilong 3 arrives at Resolute Bay. Canadian authorities board officially, inspect the vessel, document the research equipment, and discover something that changes everything. Hidden among the legitimate research equipment are seafloor mapping systems far more sophisticated than scientific research requires. High-resolution multi-beam sonar, magnetic anomaly detectors, equipment designed for locating underwater resources, possibly equipment for mapping submarine transit routes. This was not purely scientific research. This was strategic reconnaissance. The Chinese vessel was gathering intelligence on Arctic seafloor topology, mapping potential submarine lanes, identifying resource deposits, all without Canadian permission in waters Canada claims. The evidence is documented, photographed, logged. This changes the international perception. What appeared to be heavy-handed Canadian enforcement of disputed sovereignty now looks like legitimate defense against intelligence-gathering operation. Strategic outcome: Canada enforced sovereignty, but at significant cost. Relations with China are damaged. Economic retaliation is likely. But the precedent is established. The Northwest Passage is not automatically open to all vessels. Canada will inspect. Canada will enforce. Next time might be different, but this time, Canada held the line. Lessons from command decisions. First lesson: sovereignty is meaningless without enforcement. Claims on maps are worthless if ships transit without permission. Second lesson: geography determines capability. Arctic operations require specialized vessels, trained personnel, and willingness to operate in extreme conditions. Nations without these capabilities cannot project power in the far north. Third lesson: allies provide political support, but operational capability must be national. American backing is valuable, but Canadian forces must be capable of independent action, because help is always hours away in the Arctic. Was escalation avoidable? Who bears responsibility? What decision would you make in that room? These questions follow every commander who must choose between accepting violations of claimed sovereignty and risking confrontation with major power, because the global conflict room reveals that Arctic warming is opening new frontiers and new conflicts where international law is ambiguous and national interests are absolute, and the ice that once prevented confrontation is melting away, leaving only competing claims and insufficient mechanisms for peaceful resolution. Subscribe to Global Conflict Room. Inside the room where history changes.